Well, 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 we have another so-called mass shooting, this time in Virginia Beach, and the Dems, of course, are calling for strict gun control, to make sure that things like this don't happen again. It never ceases to amaze me just how delusional the anti-gunners are. The only way I can explain their robotic calls for gun control every time anyone is shot anywhere, except for Chicago, of course, is by looking at it not so much as an actual political idea, but rather as sort of a childish expression of dislike and disapproval. When people say that they just think that there should be more gun control to, protect people and make sure that folks don't get hurt and that we take away these weapons of wars, what they're saying is not so much that they want people to stop getting shot, because people get shot every day across the world, and they don't seem to have a problem with that. They never, you don't hear people tweeting out every day with the death count of people in the war in Yemen and saying, oh, this is just so terrible. We need comprehensive gun control in Yemen. No, they only really do it in Western countries where there is civilian gun ownership. So therefore, what seems to bother them is not so much that people have guns and that people are getting shot, it's that certain people own guns, and that when certain people shoot people, then they can use that as an excuse to try and take away their guns. Because it's not like that the guns themselves go away. I mean, there's lots of guns all throughout the world. It's not like outside the U.S. where there is lots of gun control and civilians can't own them. It's not like guns disappear. The guns just go into the hands of the cops. Not to mention your criminals like your mafiosos and your drug cartels and folks like that. But considering that the gun grabbers typically are the same folks who are the most concerned about issues like police brutality and, are the most likely back in the day to use the old hashtag Black Lives Matter and to talk about how bad they think the average cop is, why in their right minds would they want to give up all the guns held in civilian hands and hand them over to these evil cops who they think are just out there trying to kill black people? It would seem to me that these are mutually exclusive positions. Either you're very worried about the police and how the police have, too much power in America, how citizens don't really have much power to stand up to the police in many situations. You would think, then, that it would be a natural extension of that position to advocate more civilian gun ownership, so that the people who you think are being targeted by the police and literally murdered could defend themselves. Because someone who shoots a cop in self-defense may be in a world of pain, legally speaking, but they're better off trying to defend their position in court than being in the morgue. Now, of course, then, by extension, if the police are truly this terrible, and you let them take away all the guns from civilians, and suddenly the cops have all the guns in society, and civilians have nothing, well, then the cops can safely walk up to any black man in the street who they want, and can be pretty well assured that he's not armed. The cops then will have a license to act with even greater impunity towards the blacks. Now, when it comes to government shootings, it's not like the cops are the leaders in terms of body count. I mean, police officers in the line of duty kill relatively few people compared to, say, government troops off fighting in wars. I mean, it's pretty common for groups of civilians in the double digits to be killed by really just collateral damage in the ongoing war on terror. I mean, this happens domestically with the police raiding the wrong house too, but it's a particularly bad problem in the Middle East when you have U.S. troops raiding a home thinking they're looking for a terrorist, and they kill everybody inside, which, some of these Middle East households, you have some pretty big families, and they then find out that they had the wrong address, and it was the house 2 doors down that they were supposed to go assassinate the guy, but he already heard the gunshots and he ran away. So now you've got, maybe 8 dead civilians who did absolutely nothing wrong, who had no reason to expect that all of a sudden there were going to be a bunch of troops breaking down their door and killing them, and their lives are snuffed out just like that. Now, did gun control protect these people? Did they somehow were they made safer because the government held all the guns instead of both the government and civilians holding guns? I mean, looking at the Iraq War alone, which I know the leftists are supposed to oppose, over 500,000 people are estimated to have died as of 2006, and That was over 10 years ago. And that is not because of lone mass shooters going out and killing people in the body count, adding up to over 600,000. That is because of state-sanctioned violence. That's because of the government going in there and trying to impose their will through force with guns. So the guns don't just magically go away. It's not like they have the right to bear arms in the same way that we do in Iraq. I believe that there is some gun ownership in Iraq, but it's extremely restricted relative to the United States. And of course, you've got your groups of jihadis running around in the desert with rifles out there. But compared to the folks who get killed as a result of accidents and drone bombs and things, and who are just victims of collateral damage, the jihadis kill relatively few. I mean, the jihadis are kind of like, they're much worse in terms of body count, but they're kind of like the mass shooters here. They're a bit of the sideshow when it comes to the death count. And I haven't even gotten to the 20th century yet. I mean, hell, you look at folks like Hitler and Stalin. I mean, Hitler, of course, killed, like 20 million people? Stalin, close to 50 million. Mao puts them all to shame. He killed 100 million people. And you know something about those three countries, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, and Communist China. In none of those countries did you have civilian gun ownership like we have in the United States. Isn't that strange? I mean, you would think if they took all the guns away, that the Germans, the Russians, and the Chinese, they'd all be safe. How is it that you have so much death and destruction, yet no civilian gun ownership? Because from what I understand from our friends on the left, it is the gun owners who cause all the death in the world. I mean, if it weren't for the NRA, or the GOA, which none of them have heard of the GOA, so I'll leave them aside. But if it weren't for the NRA and all those fuddy-duddies with their AR-500s, and yes, I know AR-500 is not a gun, there would be no unnatural death in the United States. Everyone would just die from heart disease if it weren't for guns. I mean, I'm genuinely curious how some of these people would defend their positions if I was actually able to sit down with them and have a reasoned discussion without any emotion. Because I really don't know how, from the perspective of your average Democrat, how you get past the whole, okay, we don't trust the cops, but we also don't trust civilians to own guns. Because you have to pick one. Because I know we on the right, are at least in America, we generally do not trust the government in general. We don't trust the government not to commit mass genocide if given the opportunity, because we look at people like Mao and Hitler and Stalin. And even now, more recently, people are starting to look at the examples of the Indians and saying how, yes, even the United States government is capable of committing atrocities against people in our own domestic sphere. These things have happened before, and they more than likely could happen again if the government is given that much room. And frankly, I know the leftists are very concerned about the genocide against the Native Americans. So why? Considering that the Native Americans were able to hold out for quite a long time, thanks in large part to the fact that they were able to purchase firearms from American merchants. Because the leftists understand, at least from their perspective, that the United States government is evil, like a lot of governments. I mean, the Nazi comparisons are all over Twitter and Facebook and everywhere, and in public life. I mean, a lot of people legitimately think that Trump is Hitler and that we're living under the Third Reich. Now, if that's the case, why in hell would you ever give Hitler all your guns? Isn't now the time to fight back? Shouldn't you all want to, shouldn't the leftists be the most pro-gun people on the planet? I know there are some pro-gun lefties, but only the really, really hard-left communist revolutionaries are the ones on the left who own guns. But I would think that the average leftist, who these days, they do think of Republicans as Nazis, by most accounts that I've seen, other than, your centrist corporate Democrats. How do they sleep at night without going out and buying a gun for their own protection from the state, which they think is their enemy? If you have any thoughts on why people are able to hold such inconsistent, or at least seemingly inconsistent positions from my perspective, I would appreciate you leaving a comment about that. And if you are someone on the left who is both worried about, the government committing genocide and waging wars on civilian populations, and on the cops, murdering black people, could you please explain to me how those positions are consistent with trying to take away guns from from the civilian population. And finally, if you've made it this far, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. And if you really want to help the channel, clicking the share button and actually sending this video to someone who you think would enjoy it would probably be the most valuable thing you could do, because you know, us small channels don't do too well in the YouTube algorithm, particularly when we say politically incorrect keywords that deranks us in the algorithm. So with that said, I will see you back here probably tomorrow.